Bryan Munson for joining us once again, and things are quite a bit different than last time we spoke with him, as we were talking about
just a smidge.
Just 1 week ago, we didn't even know if Nebraska was going to beat Iowa, and since then, a lot has happened. So let's catch up with it and look toward the future as well in recruiting, as that is going to be a major focus this offseason with Bryan Munson of On3 and Husker Online. Bryan, how are you doing today?
Wait, there's newsworthy items out of Nebraska football? I am not aware. I did not.
You might have, if not, you might be beaten by your competition there. So we might let you go and let you go start typing some stuff up.
This is very true. Honestly, I just got the phone with Sean, and Sean's sitting here saying about the staff hitting the road this morning, Matt Rhule being out on the road in Lincoln, and we're trying to track in-home visits. Sounds like Maverick Noonan will be in home, have an in-home visit on Monday night. Like Nebraska being home with Malachi Coleman tonight. So there's a lot of stuff going on right now. Let's go ahead and get started.
Wow. Well, let's dive into it. You mentioned it there at the end. I think a lot of people a little bit shaken by seeing Malachi Coleman decommit, wondering if there's a possibility for Matt Rhule to make some inroads there. You said he's going to be making the visit tonight?
Yeah, in-home should be tonight. And obviously the decommitment yesterday surprised me, surprised Sean. We were kind of talking about it actually a little bit briefly before. It's just one of those things where it seemed like a little bit of patience here could have gone a long ways. I think when Mickey Joseph probably became the part of the picture that he was not going to be retained at Nebraska. What might have been valuable is understanding who the wide receivers coach was going to be, and maybe waiting for today to see Matt Rhule at the high school, maybe waiting for tonight to see Matt Rhule at home, or even the 12-9, official visit that the rest of the 2023 class, for the most part, are going to be in town to see. So, I think that there's a market there, obviously, for a great athlete. He's a wonderful athlete. He's got a ton of potential. And I'm sure Matt Rhule is just absolutely drooling seeing him, work and his speed and his length. But obviously there's going to be a need to kind of refold him back in again and let him kind of hear about what kind of offense they're going to run at Nebraska. And he's going to probably, wait it out now until February before he decides to do anything like re-sign or actually sign in February and probably recommit sometime before that. So, we've got some more time and things to deal with here, but it sounds like he might be headed to Michigan, the weekend after that 12-9 visit that the other team was supposed to take in December.
So, Bryan, the new staff, or currently what is constructed of the new staff, is making the rounds in the state of Nebraska. Can you give us some of the names of the currently uncommitted players that, or maybe some guys in the 2024 class that Nebraska might be trying to keep their eye on, or maybe flip or get to, maybe not commit, but just get a stronger relationship with?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Matt Rhule starts out in Lincoln and he goes to Lincoln High, Lincoln East, Lincoln Southeast. He catches, Gunnar Gatula and obviously Malachi, who we had mentioned before, but he also stops in to see Benny Nagoe. And Benny Nagoe is an interesting dude because on paper, similar numbers, similar height, similar athleticism to Malachi. That's a guy that's got to be catching Nebraska's eye too, and obviously has got that ability to maybe play another position, maybe go to the other side of the football, play some secondary. I think then after that you got to kind of look east. Nebraska was in Omaha. You got to stop in and see Gretna, Mason Goldman, who holds a Nebraska offer as an offensive tackle. St. Flores, is there really a chance there? Potentially for Flores in Nebraska, it doesn't sound like that's really much of a possibility. I know that from there, the offensive coordinator Marcus Satterfield was heading over to Omaha West Side, going to check in with Christian Jones, 2025 linebacker, Caleb Benning, 2024 defensive back, and then obviously Matt Rhule actually offered Jalen Lloyd on Sunday before he was even announced as the head coach. So lots of good stuff happening over there at West Side. I think there's probably one big thing to kind of watch here as we kind of head into this day, and maybe even a guy that I might circle here a little bit, because I think that there was some neglect going back to Scott Frost and Verduzco. I think Mickey Joseph was trying to kind of right the ship there, but I think that Matt Rhule is going to take it, and even push it even further into getting a lot of attention. But Daniel Kaelin, I think from Bellevue West is going to get a lot of attention. I think Nebraska and Matt Rhule and his staff are really going to like what they see from him on film. I know that, obviously you've got the two wide receivers in Davon Hall and Isaiah McMorris that are holding offers now, 2024 guys. Omaha North defensive lineman Tyson Terry. He's actually shown up very, very early on some of the new staff Twitter follows. He was one of the very first underclassmen to show up on any of them. So I would take that away as a huge compliment for him. And also, another guy I think Nebraska is going to be checking in on is going to be Tristan Albano. And Tristan Albano obviously had a great Class A state final. He's got, he had the big kick and has basically that clutch kind of thing going for him, along with the big leg. But I think that there is going to be some shakeups happening in the kicking room, and a guy like Albano becomes very, very valuable at that point. You might look to see if Brennan Frankie is going to enter the transfer portal here, but Albano could do kickoffs as well as field goals.
Interesting. And another in-state guy that did receive an offer was Westside track star Jalen Lloyd. Is that, because I know he was kind of leaning toward just running track, before that offer. I don't know if this will change his mind, but how does he project as a football player? Obviously, you can't teach speed, but, is he a bit of a project as a football player at the D1 level, or why wasn't he getting too much attention, I guess, outside of Nebraska?
Well, I think that the speed aspect really comes out of there first, and I think that there's always been this strong desire to kind of get into an area where you can kind of run track a little bit more year round when you start talking about Texas Tech, Florida, Georgia, and kind of able to kind of do those things where he had those track offers. As a football player, he did actually have an offer to Texas Tech. He was holding, other area offers like Illinois and Northern Iowa, North Dakota. I think that the size aspect has kind of come into the equation before on the previous staff. I think personally, you start talking about a really valuable guy that you could put it into sort of a slot. And if anybody watched Thursday Night Football and they saw, what was his name, Mark Smith or Mark Jones, the guy from New England that burned Buffalo for the only touchdown they had all night, that's the kind of speed we're talking about with Jalen Lloyd. He's the kind of guy that you can kind of put into some situations, get him into really, really good matchups for you, really bad ones for the defense. And when that speed kicks in and he gets a little bit of daylight, you're going to have a hard time catching angles on that guy to catch him as he's running away from you. So that's the kind of speed we're talking about with him. And that's honestly, the biggest thing I've seen so far about these offers outside of the offensive tackles and some other guys, they've been about speed. They've offered a couple of running backs. The one guy in North Carolina, whose name is escaping me at the moment, he was a high school state track champion and touts a 4.3840. So they are definitely going after some guys that are going to upgrade the athleticism on that roster, and I think that they're looking for it on both sides of the football. Because if you can remember too, there was an offer on Saturday, which was days before Coach Rhule gets announced, and you're sitting there going, man, he's already got these guys kind of circled in the middle. Well, he said he went and got to work right away as he left the Carolina Panthers, and then he offers Dante Lovett just himself. The Virginia Tech cornerback picks up an offer from the head coach at Nebraska, and Dante. It says a lot to me about Dante Lovett. And then Jalen Lloyd was the second guy, but those are both big-time speed guys. So clearly, Matt Rhule is talking about upgrading athleticism on the roster.
Something that's kind of gotten noticed on Nebraska as they fill off this staff is that a lot of these former these staff members that are the new staff members, I should say, are have experience in their titles and in their previous jobs as recruiters. Does that seem to be, sometimes you want a mix of those guys, but does that seem to be a real strength of the staff moving forward as Matt Rhule is putting together recruiters?
I think that that's a great sign. I think obviously you need guys that understand how that process works. You need guys that are going to have some sort of a background that you can leverage, guys who have ties to schools. etc. I think you're also going to want guys that are stepping out of current positions where they have already scouted areas, and there's guys there that maybe wherever they were at, they could never get. And if they changed, basically the perspective from coming at them now from Nebraska, working for Matt Rhule, maybe the whole lens, and the narrative changes there enough for them to go ahead and give them another look. So I think that's huge. Obviously, that Nebraska is doing that they're going out there and finding these. I'll say this as well. Not only are the recruiting guys, but they're young guys. And I'm thinking that when you start talking about the recruiting guys, being younger guys, having more energy, hitting that ground running, going out there, blazing the recruiting trail, that is a tough job. And it oftentimes comes down to just who's going to outwork who to go out there on the trail. And I think that's a good combination for what Matt Rhule is trying to pull together when it comes to his staff.
And the other question I had, kind of the more kind of a bigger look at this thing, is that Matt Rhule kind of explained his hot areas that he's going to be recruiting in his introductory press conference. I mentioned Texas, I believe, Florida,
Yep.
New Jersey. He mentioned the 500-mile radius, but for places, hotbeds like that he didn't mention, like a California or something. Is that kind of alarming, or does he just kind of have his specialties that was he kind of referencing places he had been before and where his name kind of pops?
I think it comes back to like where he's been successful before. I think he's mentioning some areas that he felt like are more relevant to Nebraska as well. Now maybe that changes a little bit as you add USC and UCLA into the Big Ten Conference. But for the time being, I think what you're talking about there is that you've got kind of this four corners of like that Southwest region, Mid-Atlantic to Northeast region across to Nebraska South down to Texas. That you're kind of casting this net. And it's kind of what I said in my 3 and Out on Wednesday. I felt like, they aren't going to necessarily all be in Florida. They're not all going to necessarily be in New Jersey. Like the first offer was in Maryland. So it falls outside the area, but geographically, you could be in Maryland or New Jersey and not know actually like what state you're really in if you're driving, because everything just looks kind of the same. It's very densely populated. So you just kind of lose that thing, as opposed to going from like Nebraska to Kansas and you can see the sign and you get the little Google alert. So I just feel like that was a little too specific. I would kind of zoom out just a little bit, and I can still see Georgia playing a factor. I could still see them trying to get, into Texas and then knocking down the door a little bit in Oklahoma and Louisiana and some Arkansas. But I thought it was really, really interesting that Matt Rhule knew the term 500-mile radius, because that's been a term that I think was really more coined around like Bill Callahan and Sean Watson and Jay Norvell. So that goes back a few staffs anyway, to where I felt like that's really where that was kind of that came from. And then trying to basically increase the population of the state of Nebraska by extending the state border out to 500 miles, similar to like what Texas does.
Yeah, that I thought that was that caught my ear too. I thought that was really good that he knew that. Perhaps Trev Alberts was talking about that with him when he was interviewing him. All right, final question that I have, Bryan, and maybe it's too early to tell, but just from the I guess the early tea leaves of what you're seeing, it's just fascinating how college football teams are going to build. You have year one under Matt Rhule. Traditionally, he's kind of been able to build up and each year get better and better with his original recruiting classes. Now that he's back in college, the transfer portal is kind of a new thing to him. Do you envision Nebraska being a heavy factor once again in the transfer portal, or do you think because it's year one, he's got his time, that he's going to probably be hitting the high school recruits a little bit harder to build the foundation?
I lean more towards the latter, and that might surprise some people. Now, he may go transfer portal heavy on some positions. Like, let's think about in the trenches where he talked about he wants to be stout. He wants to own the line of scrimmage. Well, I don't think they're going to get there by recruiting high school guys. And obviously, I think people are pretty familiar with the performance that they saw out of the 2023 group and the need for talent across those spots. So maybe you go ahead and say, hey, look, we're going to have to get more physical immediately when it comes to positions along the line of scrimmage. But honestly, there were some words that he was saying in his press conference about like, Sean asked a question about the first 4 days in his office. And he said, I don't think anything in the first 4 days in my office is going to be, is going to mean a whole lot in the big scope. And I took that away as being very, very interesting, because I think that he doesn't want to be too disruptive. I don't think he wants to be overly disruptive when it comes to his roster. I don't think he wants to be overly disruptive when it comes to the process. And I think that means you're going to see some portal transfers, but I think you're going to see a lot of high school guys. And it's going to be really interesting to see if any of the junior college stuff, remains valid as we kind of move forward. Are they going to kind of skip on that and say we're going to go portal and high school and just glance right past the junior college guys that were already had Nebraska officers? I haven't heard anything at all on that front.
Always entertaining and always very helpful as we learn much from a Bryan Munson interview. Bryan, thanks for your time, and once again this Friday.
Have a great weekend, guys. We'll see you.
All right, there he goes, Bryan Munson of Husker Online in on 3. Interesting stuff. We'll kind of break that down. Look forward to some other news. Former Big 8 rivals, Kansas and Missouri, set to play in the Liberty Bowl. Except for one of them says, no, I'm not doing that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Coming up next here on the Ticket Water Cooler, 93.7 The Ticket.